Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Jackson, and I will be presenting to you the life and information of Halfdan Ragnarsson. This is my partner, Levi. Never mind. It's just me because Levi is not in this class anymore. So I'll be doing this solo. So bear with me. So let's get started. So imagine you're living in England over 1,000 years ago. You live in a quiet town. You live on a farm. There's a small church across your farm, and there's small kingdoms constantly fighting with each other. Then one morning, ships appear on the horizon. They're not traders, they're not visitors, they're warriors. And the people we now call Vikings didn't just come to raid, they came to stay. So one of the leaders responsible for these permanent changes in England was a man named Halfdan Ragnarsson. And he was a figure remembered as both a conqueror and a king. So let's get into some Viking context and refresh our minds before we get into Halfdan. So the Viking Age lasted roughly from 1793 AD to 1066 AD. And it traditionally began with the attack of the monastery of Lindisfarne, which shocked Christian Europe because monasteries were seen as sacred and protected spaces. But Scandinavia geography played a big role in Viking expansion. So much of the land that was rocky and difficult to farm, populations were increasing and the opportunities for wealth were very, very limited. So as a result, many warriors looked outward towards Europe. So England at this time was divided into competing kingdoms such as Northumbria, America, East Anglia, and Wessex. And these kingdoms frequently fought with each other, which weakened their defenses. And the Vikings recognized this political instability in Europe, in England at that time. So over time, their raids evolved into organized invasions designed not to only steal wealth, but to claim those territories. So let's get into who Halfdan Ragnarsson was. So Halfdan Ragnarsson was a Norse Viking leader, active during the mid-19th century, likely originating from Denmark, or other Scandinavian regions. Unlike early Viking raids, which operated in smaller groups, Halfdan commanded a large, disciplined force capable of sustaining campaigns for years. So he appears repeatedly in Anglo-Saxon chronicles, which is significant because these records usually only mention leaders that were considered major threats. So what makes Halfdan especially important in his strategic thinking was his campaigns and how carefully he planned his campaigns. This targeted political valuable cities rather than just random settlements. So this suggests that he understood warfare not just as combat, but as a political power and a political lead. So his family. So according to Norse tradition, Halfdan was a son of Ragnar Lothbrok, one of the most famous Viking leaders and figures in all Viking history. If you even have a little bit of info about the Vikings, you should know who Ragnar is. So historians debate whether Ragnar existed exactly as described, because the stories themselves reveal something important about Viking culture. But Vikings preserved their history through oral storytelling than rather than written documentation. Um, so it's a little bit different from England, where they have everything thoroughly documented. So these sagas emphasized honor, revenge, and reputation. Being connected to a legendary father like Ragnar, this would have strengthened Halfdan's authority among other warriors. So, whether fully historical or partially mythological, these traditions helped shape how Viking leaders gained loyalty and legitimacy in Viking culture. So, let's get into the Great Heathen Army. In 1865 AD, Viking activity changed dramatically with the arrival of the Great Heathen Army. So this was not just your typical raid. It was a very big, massive, organized invasion force composed of multiple Viking leaders and thousands of Viking warriors. So Halfdan served as one of the primary commanders. The army moved carefully across England, forming alliances when useful and attacking strategies were chosen targets. So their success came from speed, coordination, and physiological warfare. So English kingdoms were very unprepared for an enemy willing to stay through winter, and they actually maintained very prolonged campaigns. And so this invasion marked a permanent Viking political influence in England at the time. So let's get into the capture of York now. So one of Halfdan's greatest achievements was the capture of York in 866 AD. York was one of England's most important cities because it was very big economically and politically. So controlling this city gave Vikings access to trade routes and legitimacy as rulers. So under Viking rule, the city was changed to the name of York to Jorvik. I think I'm saying this right. So archaeological discovery showed that this city was thriving with markets, skilled craftsmanship, and actually international trade connections. So instead of just destroying and raiding York, Vikings invested in it. So this challenges the stereotypes that Vikings were only just violent. They only came to pillage and raid. This clearly shows that they understood economic and urban development. So as we get into Halfdan's leadership and role, so after the conquest, Halfdan transitioned from a warrior to a king of Umbria, and ruling required different skills rather than just fighting. He needed to maintain stability. He needed to distribute land and manage both Viking settlers and local Anglo-Saxon populations. So land distribution encouraged Viking families to settle permanently, which contributed to farming communities and that replaced temporary war camps. So this shift showed that Vikings adapted to new roles, and Halfdan was no longer just conquering territory, he was building a functioning society. So now as we get into Danelaw, so the territories under Viking control became known as Danelaw. And here, Scandinavian legal systems influenced daily life. Trade expanded, intermarriage occurred, and cultures blended together during this. And then, so many words today, such as sky and law and window, come from the Old Norse language, and it was very big influence on Norse language. So, such as like place names ending in by or throp. This also reflected Viking settlement patterns. So this demonstrates how deeply Viking culture became integrated into English society at this time. So the campaigns in Ireland. So later in Halfdan's life, uh, he turned to Ireland, where Viking settlements already existed, but Viking leaders often completed with, sorry, Viking leaders often competed with each other over power, and these conflicts show that Viking society was a political complex rather than, being unified with each other. But Halfdan's campaign in Ireland ultimately proved a little bit more difficult than his successes in England, which this will lead to his death. He likely died around 877 AD, fighting in Ireland at the time. So, although his life ended violently, his political and cultural influence continued through Viking settlements, which were established during his rule. So, some character traits about Halfdan. So he was strategic rather being reckless, and a lot of people who don't really know much about Viking culture or history, they just think, Vikings just raid and pillage, and they just take what they want and they leave. But as we could see with Halfdan, he was a very strategic Viking ruler. He came and he noticed that there was a political influence in these cities, and he decided to build up his Viking culture rather than just raiding and pillaging and leaving. So he was very ambitious in expanding territory rather than just taking and leaving. So he was also adaptable from transitioning from a warrior in this aspect to a ruler, and he was also very ruthless when he needed to be. So these traits reflected the dual identity of Viking leaders that were capable of both destruction and organization. So the positive legacy of Halfdan, so Halfdan's leadership helped establish stable settlements. He expanded trade networks and encouraged cultural exchange between the Scandinavians and the Anglo-Saxons. So his actions contributed to a pretty big economic growth and a long-term regional stability. But there is also some negative parts of his legacy. So Anglo-Saxon sources emphasize devastation caused by Viking invasions, included violence, displacement, and destruction of other communities. So for many people living at the time, Halfdan was not a builder, but as an invader. So the historical impact. Interestingly, Viking invasions forced English kingdoms to actually cooperate defensively. So this pressure eventually contributed to the political unification under other strong rulers. So in this way, Viking invasions indirectly helped shape the formation of what England would become today. So as we end with this presentation, Halfdan was more than just a Viking warrior. He was a leader who actually shaped the course of early English history. And he did this through conquest, he did this through strategy, and he did this through settlement. And he showed that during the Viking Age, it was only just about destruction, but also it changed cultural influence. And as a key commander of the Great Heathen Army, he helped transform Anglo-Saxon England in many ways that could still be traced today. And his story reminds us that history is not just shaped by battles, it was by the lasting impact leaders left behind. And so, whether remembered as a conqueror or a founder, Halfdan Ragnarsson remains a very powerful example of how an individual can influence an entire era. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. Myself, not, I don't have a partner, but yeah, thank you. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. Myself, not, I don't have a partner, but yeah, thank you.